Today we talk about Stu Ungar, the degenerate savant, poker god. These facts are not disputed. As I'm blabbering on, I'm going to show you some paperwork I saved from back in the day. And it kind of makes me sad that today everything is online. I mean, what do you save today? People don't cut out the paper clippings anymore. They don't have this World Series of Poker pamphlet, magazine. Everything's online, and I feel like we're going to lose some things in history. But that's not the story today. The story is about Stu Ungar. People always ask me about Stu Ungar back in the day. And the first thing that hits me, comes to my mind, is how small the poker community was back then. Nobody was starstruck like they are today. I mean, nobody rushed the big players asking for selfies. I mean, we didn't even know what a selfie was back then. And as you can see here, Huck Seed was the reigning champion going into 1997. Huck Seed had won it in 96. So the year that Stu Ungar won it, his last time, 97, Huck Seed was the reigning champion. But getting back to the feeling back then, like I said, we were not starstruck by the big players. And I think that the players had more dignity, more class. I mean, maybe we were bigger degenerates back then for sure, but we never thought of Puggy Pearson or Amarillo or Stewie or Johnny Moss as rock stars. I mean, they were not rock stars. You sat at the table with them and they told the same jokes they've been telling for decades. They cussed at the dealers. They threw their cards when they got beat. I mean, like I said, they cussed at the dealers like they were longshoremen. But you really felt like you were one of the boys, and this was just a regular poker night at the shoe. So even though Stu Ungar sighting back then, because he had a lot of drug problems, but a Stu Ungar sighting back then might be equivalent today to a Tom Dwan sighting, okay? But even though you saw Stu Ungar, you didn't bum rush him. You didn't go up there and, I guess people just had more restraint back then. I mean, like I said, we were not starstruck, and these guys were not rock stars. So, okay, TV changed all that. Okay, so we all know that. TV changed everything. These big guys are now rock stars. You get your selfies with them. It's like a circus. Okay, back then, your wants and desires were to win at poker. And if you beat Puggy Pearson out of a pot in 2040 at the Horseshoe, it was so much sweeter, okay? And then you got, lots of old-timers back then. Oklahoma Johnny always had great old stories to tell when he held court at the Tropicana, a little poker room there at the Tropicana. The smaller poker rooms were like the Cheers TV show, where everybody knew your name. So I'm just trying to give you a feeling of what it was like back then. I mean, it wasn't like today. I mean, the people today, they walk around the strip, they sightsee. I mean, back then you came to Vegas for one reason, to gamble, and you did not bring your children. Okay, so a little history on myself. I used to come to Vegas in the early 80s when I was in the service in California. But I didn't actually move to Vegas until 1986. So like people asked me, about Stu. But after 86, by then he was on the decline. I mean, he got a divorce. His drug problem was getting worse. But I mean, you would see him around. I mean, the Super Bowl of poker at Caesars, he won that in 84, 88, 89. The Golden Nugget always had big games before the Mirage opened up at the Nugget. I mean, the drug dealers came in there. They had stacks of $100 bills, 6 inches high. I mean, these games were very good for Stu Ungar. And these drug dealers were easy to beat. I mean, it's not like these mathematical kids today you got. These online kids today are a lot tougher than the drug dealers were back then. So, I mean, there was always a Stu Ungar sighting at the shoe. In the end, though, during the end there, you might not even recognize him. You might mistake him for a homeless guy, which wasn't too far From the truth. Okay, so in 1986, I was working at Little Caesars. Little Caesars was famous for taking big bets. A big bookmaker there took $1 million bet from Bob Stupek one time. And I heard the bookmakers say, then when I was at Little Caesars, that Stewie would sometimes get a good tip on a horse. But all in all, he lost big on the horses. He lost big on the dogs. He lost big on the sports. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but these are the facts, and these facts have to be documented, I guess. And people love to talk about Stewie. I mean, he was a poker god savant. I mean, who else are you going to talk about? But most of the stories now are legend. Now I can only think that the legends will get bigger and bigger, especially as guys like Doyle Brunson pass away, the guys that were actually there and experienced it, and the truth might be lost forever. I already hear some stories that are not totally true, like he lost money playing blackjack at the Lady Luck. I mean, that story is not true. Fact or fiction might one day be indistinguishable. Okay, my biggest regret, okay, personally, the biggest regret I have in the 1990s, okay, because I is wondering how many times I passed Stewie by, just thinking he was a panhandler. I mean, my best guess, since I worked downtown, I worked all the joints downtown. I played poker in all the places, and I practically lived downtown. I would guess it was in the vicinity of somewhere. I probably passed him 100 times just thinking he was a panhandler. Probably lucky for me because he might have hit me up for a fin. But I do know for a fact it happened at least a half a dozen times because when I walked up to the podium at the Horseshoe, the poker room podium, Camille was there. Camille would ask me, "Did Stewie just hit you up?" And I would act surprised, like, "Damn, that was Stewie was over there." And, it was just a passing thing. I mean, Stewie was in the area and he would hit people up. I think Stewie, as a panhandler, was just as good at reading people as he was when he was playing poker on the poker table. I mean, he could read people, even as a panhandler, as he was going to hit you up for a Redbird chip. I mean, he knew which players would give him a Redbird when he came up to the rail. But I think all in all, we all like to think of Stewie when he was on top of his game. What was he great at? Okay, so when you come down to single and double deck blackjack, okay, think you can beat that game. Remember, single, double deck blackjack, Stewie could count. He did well. But when you're talking about the downtown history of Stewie, he was backed off on many of these places because he was a well-known gambler, and eventually they will back you off, especially when you're winning. I mean, what that means, back you off? It means ban you from playing 21 in the casinos. So there weren't very many casinos downtown that he could play blackjack, a single deck, double deck. I mean, at first, like I say, in the beginning, they will let you play if you're losing, but eventually the eye in the sky just gets tired of tracking your play, and when you catch a good streak, and then they back you off. They come, "Sir, you're welcome to play poker, roulette, dice, slots, keno, Caribbean stud poker, and bingo, but your action in the 21 pit is no longer wanted, okay? We catch you playing 21 here in the future, and you will be 86 and possibly arrested." That's what the floor boss tells you. Normally the assistant shift boss comes up and backs you off. But Stewie wasn't the only one. So I'm going to try to give you a feeling that Stewie was like any other degenerate gambler that came here to Vegas, trying to get the odds on his side. And in single and double blackjack, we all did it. Stewie was probably better than most of us. I think his last blackjack session was at the Lady Luck. I've already talked about that. He had a special deal set up there with the general manager, and it did not go well for the Lady Luck. But that's blackjack in 21. But in general, I mean, Stewie was a degenerate of a different level. I mean, very few people went to the level of degeneracy that Stu Ungar went to. I mean, in every degenerate of Stewie's caliber that I have ever knew, and this is a fact, came from New York. I think it's a requirement. The Big Apple is a breeding ground for that animal. That's a whole different level of degeneracy. And ultimately, this is something I've personally seen, and I've seen lots of degenerates. Ultimately, all these New York degenerates always befriend a gambler from the Ohio region. Okay? It's just the way that it works. I'm not exactly sure why it works this way, but I guess it was a good gambling partnership or a gambling marriage. The Ohio River gambler uh, and the New York degenerate gambler. But the Midwestern guys, they have boundaries, and they never quite reach the level of a Stewie in degeneracy. I mean, these are facts. But it makes for a good marriage, if also briefly. But Stewie was a second generation gambler. His father was a bookie in New York. Running the numbers in his head came natural. He could feel you out with small bets, basically toy with you when he was in his prime. We're talking about on the poker table, no limit games. I mean, he had a total disregard for money, a key characteristic of a no limit player. Cocaine would enhance his cognitive ESP. Seriously, cognitive ESP, this cocaine would he had a temporary chemical bionic magic trick that would, in the end, it would destroy him. I mean, today the younger kids try to emulate it with the use of caffeine. But the caffeine is a slower, bush league imitation of Stewie. All or nothing, reckless drug use. I mean, these kids today don't understand the drive that Stewie had. I mean, to literally give your life to be the best at something. It's sad and poetic simultaneously. I mean, he had no problem using cocaine to get that added ESP edge. Stewie's life was gambling. That was it in a nutshell. I mean, okay, the problem Stewie had, the number one problem is he had no backup plan. It was all or nothing. And he had it all. He had it all, and he had nothing. He had it both. The world will probably never ever see the likes of a Stewie again. I mean, and for gamblers, I mean, divorce is stacked in the deck for him. He got divorced, I believe, in '86. The drugs started getting worse. No one could control him. I mean, how do you protect someone from themselves? You cannot. He was his own worst enemy. I shiver in my bones thinking of the demons that Stewie had to battle in the late 80s and 90s. I've knocked a few monkeys off my back personally, but Stewie had a jungle of monkeys riding him. And in the end, cocaine and all the other drugs turned the kid into a panhandler, reduced to begging. This is a cautionary tale for any youngster out there who thinks he can bet on a number that changes every time without a backup plan. You got to have a backup plan. Some sort of business or something. But back to Stewie, I mean, his highs were as high as they got, and his lows were as low as they got. I mean, the people in Stewie's inner circle considered him a man-child, a savant of cards and poker. But a child when it came to the normal things in life, like planning vacations or retirement planning or whatever else families do, he had no use for that. Also, everybody back then, everybody was a male chauvinistic pig. I mean, all the real men back then were like that. I mean, the kids today just don't understand the degenerate type of gamblers that used to come to Vegas. I mean, the 70s and 80s, again, it's hard for people today to understand it. Reckless, ruthless psychos would come here. This was a playground designed for them specifically. As long as you gambled, the casinos and the cops left you alone. You could do some crazy stuff. You were allowed to destroy yourself, and no one cared one way or another. Just don't let the cards stop flipping. And that's the truth. The dice always keep rolling in Vegas, but sooner or later your luck runs out and the drugs wear you down. And Stewie lived in some really bad, run-down, flea-bag motels in the worst part of Vegas, where drug dealers and pimps and whores and hustlers and thieves surrounded him. He owed money to drug dealers. I mean, he was actually scared that the drug dealers were going to kill him, so he would get some of his inner circle friends. He would call them up on the phone, and they would put him up in a better hotel. I mean, he owed his soul to Satan. Well, I know I have not painted a pretty picture here, and I've left out all the good times when Stu Ungar was chasing the fast, beautiful women, a pocket full of money, and living the Vegas dream to the extreme.